Charlotte Dujardin, Olympic champion, equestrian icon, a rider who redefined modern dressage. But what happens when a golden reputation collides with controversy? This podcast is all about diving deeper into the equestrian world, beyond just the headlines. I'm Caroline Lindsay, horsesaddlerider.com. Welcome to the Horse Saddle Rider podcast, the place where I scrutinise the big issues shaping the horse world today. This episode details how Charlotte felt about the possibility of losing the ride on Valegro, riding other horses, and problems with Valegro in the run-up to the Olympics.
Hello and welcome back. And thank you to those who have been contributing to the comments and to those who are just generally following this story. I know that you're making a difference. First of all, let me point out for some of you who have just dropped in, I did not write this book. I'm merely reading from it. Chapter 10, Rock Bottom. A part of me could, of course, understand why Carl wanted to sell Valegro. Like me, Carl had to work hard for a living. He didn't have a rich family to support him, and at the end of the day, he still had to pay his mortgage. At the time, Carl was also facing losing Utopia. He only had a minority share in Utopia, and after the Olympics, life-changing amounts of money were being offered for both horses. So it is very difficult to decline offers when you've trained a horse to Olympic level and the horse is winning medals. And as Charlotte found with her horse, Des, if the horse becomes injured, potentially there's no value there, or certainly not until the horse has been fully rehabilitated. Des was never going to be the horse I needed him to be, and I knew in my heart of hearts that he was better off going somewhere he could be a star in his own right. If Blueberry did have to be sold, I wasn't going to have any say in where he went, and that for me was almost the hardest thing to deal with. So she's trained Valegro for 6-7 years and she has no share in him, financial share. So she's concerned that the horse can be sold. But I also felt that he did not owe Carl or me anything. What he'd done and what I'd achieved with him was unheard of. And he'd given so much, not just to me, but to the sport and to the whole country. So, yes, it is gutting, not just when top sport horses get sold, but when they have to be sold abroad because there isn't the amount of money within their country of origin to keep them here. So it is a fact of life with elite sport horses. I didn't want to be selfish because I knew what a difference the money would make to everyone. So she's come back to the money side of things. But at the same time, I was angry with Carl. He wouldn't discuss things with me. So, yeah, she's done the bulk of the work on this horse. And she's angry because she has no say in what happens to him. I have enormous respect for Carl. I felt that if we could have talked things through more, I would have been better able to cope with the situation. But here you are, you have a young rider whose dream is to work with Carl. He's given her the opportunity. Yeah, there weren't any wages, but she was given a massive opportunity and mentored and provided with a horse. So I can see how this would be a business arrangement between those who owned the horse, which was Carl and one other, I believe. Things got pretty heated and my behaviour made Carl quite cross at times. So she got quite stroppy with this. So she doesn't sound like she was very accepting. And yeah, I understand it's difficult, but she knew for quite a long time that the situation was building up to Valegro being sold, but it's really annoying her that she has no involvement. She hasn't been consulted about it. The thought that I might lose him made me feel like my heart was being ripped out and wrenched in every direction. He was a massive part of me, and the relationship I had with him was unique. Yes, it was. He was delivering on her ambitions. The sale didn't go through. Christmas was coming up. Carl was thinking about Olympia. He still had Utopia, who wasn't yet sold, but he had decided that this would be their last show as a combination. I genuinely didn't know if I wanted to go to Olympia. Since September, I had been made #1 in the FEI world rankings, so she's got right to the top here with Valegro. I wanted to finish my career with Blueberry at our best. If we didn't have a future, my first reaction was that I wanted to go out on the high of winning double gold at the Olympics and not risk anything going wrong. So doesn't sound like she wants to keep riding him. It just explains that he was a vehicle. She's referring to her career and going out at the top. And that was her first reaction. And Ian, her associate, has always been my shoulder to cry on, the person who picks me up and puts me in the place I mentally need to be. People often think he's my partner. Carl, on the other hand, is not very sympathetic if you're ill, whereas if he's ill, he's dying. And just as I was about to go into the freestyle, he scared me to death. So she's riding Valegro in the freestyle. I could see Carl at the entrance frantically telling me to hurry up and get in to the ring. It completely threw me and I messed up the start of the test because Blueberry and I were both tense. So doesn't take much to derail her. I was just happy when we came out with 87.95%. Carl was third. So she was like nearly 8% ahead of the rider in second place, Isabel Worth, and Carl was third with his final ride on Utopia. So it felt like a great way to end the year. But as soon as the magic Olympia bubble burst, I came smashing back to reality. Christmas Eve, I found out that another buyer was interested in Valegro. Fame isn't important to me. It's not why I ride. Possibly not, but she's already stated many times that ambition is. Finding a horse that I can work with and train is what I love, more than going out and competing and trying to do well. That doesn't quite fit with what she said before, unless, of course, she's referring to this urge to this game of overcoming any obstacle. But she does like to win. She has said before in this book that she rides to win. End of January. Meanwhile, Blueberry still hadn't sold. Potential buyers had also dropped out. For the rest of the year, things hung in the balance. But ultimately, Carl and the other joint owner decided they were going to keep him. They formed a syndicate. Now, I don't know why they decided to keep him, and announced in the press that they were looking for investors. Another owner became the third of Blueberry's owners in January 2014, so by the following year. And we all knew he would be staying with us for the rest of his life. November, I had bought a beautiful grey mare, Florentina, along with her mum and another sharer. She was only 2, coming 3, and would spend another year turned away in a field. But I already knew she was going to be a super horse. Presumably she's quite pretty as well, because Charlotte seems to be averse to what she terms as an ugly horse. I haven't read anything in the book about her childhood and her competing in beauty pageants. So I just wonder what this obsession with looking good is. If you're a competitive rider and the horse moves well, then what does it matter if the horse is ugly or not? But she's not what I would term a strikingly pretty girl herself. So I just wonder where that comes from. December, she found out she had been awarded an OBE. Carl and Laura had both been made MBEs, which is a step below. Here's some more images here. Receiving her OBE and riding in various competitions. And Valegro's groom, Alan, who she admits she wouldn't have got to where she was without him being part of the team. So a shout out for the grooms there. I had lots of other positive things in my life and other horses that I wanted to ride, including now Utopia. With European and Olympic golds under his belt, Carl felt that he'd done everything he wanted to with Uti. She was given an amazing opportunity to get more experience, and she already loved riding Uti at home. He isn't the easiest horse to ride, and he'd got to the point with Carl where he knew the Grand Prix inside out, and he'd started to get a little bit cheeky, which would be disobedient in Charlotte's world. With me, though, he was feeling super. You just wait, Carl kept saying. You wait. They got to Saumur, warmed up, and Uti felt brilliant. Then, as we were going round the outside and about to go into the arena, he suddenly said, "No thanks." Of course, Charlotte's not used to horses saying no. He was like a snail. He did not want to go, and with Blueberry I'm thinking it, and we're doing it. With Uti, I was thinking it, and nothing was happening. So she's got this tremendous amount of experience working up to Grand Prix level on basically one horse. And then when she takes the ride on another one, things don't go so well for her. I was kicking. I was sweating. I've never puffed so much in my life as I did trying to get him round that test. Okay, so lack of harmony there. And her reaction is to kick, push. It was not something I was used to. And when I came out, Carl could not stop laughing, so that couldn't have gone down well. Uti didn't have any reason to behave that way other than the fact he was being very cheeky and idle. She just doesn't like it when these horses don't work for her. We won with Carl second. I was determined there wasn't going to be a repeat performance in the freestyle. Uti is a stallion, but he also needed a bit of squashing down. What's squashing down? I haven't seen anything in the FEI guidelines for that. He was trying to be a typical man and take over. And as I rode into the freestyle, I'd made up my mind he was never going to play around with me again. This is frightening. It's frightening. So what does she do? She doesn't tell us. She doesn't give us any training tips here. I wanted to see if I could replicate Valegro's performance on Uti, a bit of the feeling I got with Blueberry, Valegro, and in the end I did, but it was 10 times harder. So Sounds like she can really put up a struggle with these horses. And that to me is not harmonious. That's not what dressage is about. But she came out with 81%. Which was 7 points ahead of Carl. They were first and second, but more importantly, I was able to go home feeling that I hadn't completely failed to follow in Carl's footsteps. So again, the competition here, that Carl was winning on Utopia. Therefore, to prove herself, she also had to win on Utopia, and she won with a very clear margin, pushing and pulling and kicking and sweating. We took them both back to France for Compiègne in June, but things didn't go to plan. First day he was fine, then he got bitten by a fly, right where his saddle went. It wouldn't have been fair to continue, but I was very disappointed to have to withdraw. The upside, however, was that it gave me more time to kick Carl's butt into shape with Golly. Just some interesting language there. And that it almost feels like when she has to step up to the plate, it involves aggression. And this horse was a very expressive mover, but he was also a real chicken. Why does she have to be so disparaging about these horses, one after the other, if they're not perfect to her, like Valegro, who wasn't entirely perfect because she had to use so much rein contact that her arms burned with him. But she clearly likes them to be willing and submissive. He was afraid of everything. That's the annoying thing about horses. You can have a horse with all the talent in the world, but if it doesn't have the right mentality, it doesn't matter. Yeah, but then how do they get them to Grand Prix level if they're lacking in motivation? Carl won both the Grand Prix and the Special. Then it was on to Rotterdam in June for Blueberry's first run of the year. Blueberry wasn't really on my aids and had gone back to being really strong. So he's become quite a puzzle to her again, as he was in his early days. He was also starting to question me a little, so potentially resisting, which he'd never done before. Going down the last centre line, he got a bit sneaky and tried to stop. Well, why? Most horses change when they get to their third year at Grand Prix, so it wasn't a surprise. The first year, they don't have the experience, so they're relying on you as a rider. Year 2, they know a bit more. Your job is a bit easier. Everything's more established and polished. Year 3, and they really start to know the test. So then your job is to stop them anticipating and trying to take control. I wonder how she does that. They're clever animals and just doing what we've taught them. So she's acknowledging that horses have intelligence, but they must submit to her. Although it wasn't my best test with Blueberry, 82% was enough for first. The new plan was that he'd take Uti to the Europeans, this is Carl, and that both of us would have our final run through at Hickstead a few weeks before. In the meantime, both horses had to be got fit without actually working them harder, which meant regular sessions on the water treadmill at Hartbury. So, good, they're not just being ridden to fitness. Not long before, Carl suggested that I change Blueberry's bit. He was getting so strong, and we thought it might give me more control. So, using the bit, the double bridle, the double bit to control the horse. Warming up for the Grand Prix, I realised it had been a mistake. But by that point, it was too late. I was upset with myself because the changes were totally down to rider error, not being able to operate the bit. My legs froze up. Carl was always shouting at me about forgetting to move them. You have to hold him back, keep him short, use your legs. So, yeah, that's how these Grand Prix horses were being trained here, holding on to the front end until your arms burn. This is not harmony. In any case, although we won both the Grand Prix and Special, we should have done much better, so it wasn't enough for her. At the start of the Special, I'd even felt we could have gone on to get another world record. So she's getting quite, dare I say, taking it for granted that Valegro could continue to deliver and not accepting that he's struggling to do so. So he's getting very strong. They've changed the bit and things aren't working to plan. But mostly it was just Carl screaming at me and picking me up on every single little thing. So this just makes me think, why, after all this training and having a highly competent mentor, why does she keep forgetting? Why does she have to be screamed at? Where's the progression? Does she have gaps in her training? It made me really focus and sharpen up. Well, she was always focused. We ended up running through the entire test 3 times, which is a lot. And even when Carl was satisfied that something looked right, if it didn't feel right to me, we did it again. Could they not just get creative with this? Why is it repetition, repetition, repetition? And referring to Blueberry, I think it's important to let him know when he's done something well. Reward is a big part of the way we work with our horses, and the aim is always to make sure that they lead a happy, healthy life. Well, what about the horse in the video? Where was that horse's reward? I just think there are gaps. She clearly can't go from horse to horse without problems. Training sessions she's yelled and yelled at because she either can't apply what's needed or she forgets, in my view. But Carl's philosophy and management style, which I've learned, is that horses need to be horses. It doesn't matter how precious they are. It's good for their bodies to be moving around and it's good for their brains. They need that free time just chilling out and eating grass. Yes. It's the same when we train them. For us, it's never drill, 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 push, push, push. Well, I've just read that it's drill, 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 push, push, push. The horses we ride are athletes too, and we have to think about keeping them fit and sound long term. You can't expect horses to last if you're pushing their bodies 7 days a week. Oh, it's good that they get time off. Because Blueberry always needed to improve his walk, hill work was a great way of making him stride out, as opposed to just walking faster and faster. But I think a lot of dressage riders are guilty of only riding in an arena, not even with a few poles on the ground, just riding and hoping that eventually the horse will understand what the rider wants. I don't like her training style. It doesn't fit with all my learning and certification about training any athlete, not just horses. Doesn't fit at all. To me, it's cruel to just keep riding them until they submit, until they conform, until they get right what the rider has in mind for them. It must be a very miserable life, a miserable training session for a horse to know that there's just very little reward and very little give here, very little learning even. Carl is so tall he rides with his stirrups 6 holes longer. We all have our own way of riding, the advanced moves, which is another reason why I'd never want to buy a ready-made horse. Okay, so it's about training the horse to adapt to the rider's way of going, the rider's way of communicating with them. Everything's very personalised at the top level, and so Carl will sometimes struggle to do things on my horses, and I'll struggle with his. But working with Carl has helped me learn to keep my cool whatever is thrown at me, and it always seems to be that the more pressure I'm under, the better I ride. Well, just seems to me if the horse isn't performing, she gets very frustrated and somewhat aggressive. By now, I'd been on such a high for so long that I was bound to have a fall. But knowing that didn't make it any less tough. We all knew that Blueberry didn't like heat, but the weather when we arrived in Aachen was so hot and humid, even I didn't want to be outdoors. We ended up 6th with 76.9%, which was 7 points behind the winner. It was a situation I'd never been in before with Blueberry, so not being placed first is somewhat not an option for her. And although Carl was supportive, it was a shock to both of us. Blueberry and I are not machines. But we'd been performing so consistently that to finish unplaced was a real blow. We hadn't lost like that in over 2 years. Afterwards, I locked myself in the lorry with Ian so that no one could come and speak to me. So she just finds it very difficult to not win. Reading comments, and win by big margin too. Reading comments on the internet is something I've always avoided. So presumably she won't be watching me because I know how vicious people can be. Vicious? Riders can end up being portrayed as monsters. Yes. Which I find deeply upsetting. I mean, have we got someone with a split personality here? I know my horses and Carls are happy in what they do, and that as riders we love them to bits. But they have to win. The vibe had been horrible, and I really didn't think I could go through it again. But for the first time I felt afraid. I was afraid of getting it wrong. I was afraid of making mistakes. And I was afraid of being criticised by people. Well, you sure were going to be criticised for whipping that horse relentlessly. And now I still don't understand fully why she did that. There's obviously parts of that story that are missing. These were emotions I'd never experienced before when I was competing. And I felt completely out of my depth. So yeah, here you have someone with relentless ambition. She's winning everything there is to win at the highest level. And she won't settle for anything less. And it's a terrible blow to her when she doesn't succeed. As I rode into the arena, I had tears in my eyes. The fear was awful. "You'll be fine, Eddie," Carl kept saying, but the soundtrack in my head telling me I couldn't do it was drowning him out. She did better, coming second. Nevertheless, I went home shaken. Blueberry hadn't been at the top of his game. But normally when he didn't give his best, it was still enough. He couldn't be brilliant every time. But I'd been fortunate in never having a bad ride until now and knew I was going to need some help picking myself up again. Well, what about Blueberry? There was clearly a problem there. What about the horse? Why didn't she question that he wasn't performing beyond saying it was too hot? So she entered into a sports psychology program. People don't always understand the time and effort that goes into training horses, and almost all riders have had the experience of rides being taken away from them. It had happened to me so much as a kid that after nearly losing Blueberry in 2012, I decided my days of getting on anything were over. Okay, so this is a reference to her childhood and the issue of horses being trained by her and sold on. I didn't want to be in the same situation of powerlessness again. Okay, so here's another clue. She felt as a child that she had no say, and also we've read that it was quite upsetting for her to be excluded from Valegro's negotiations when he was up for sale. And now I only train and compete horses that I have at least a 50% share in. Okay, so financially, when the horses have to move on, she at least is remunerated. So this reads like it bothers her, despite the great experience she may have with top horses. It's important to her to at least part own the horse. Teaching has taken me all around the world, and it's something I love doing. I don't beat around the bush. If you've come for a lesson, you've got to be open to criticism. But I love trying to encourage people to be better. So what happened to the young rider that was seated on a horse that was being whipped so severely? What was the rider supposed to do? Didn't sound at that point like she was encouraged to be better. I try to make it fun as well. Well, that didn't look like a lot of fun.
If you found this episode thought-provoking, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, leave a review. It really helps more equestrians and horse lovers find the podcast. You can also join the conversation on the Horse Saddle Rider YouTube channel. And finally, I'll be giving you more insights into the equestrian world. So be sure to come back and join me so that together we can campaign for better conditions for our sport horses.